Chapter 11, Whispers Beneath the Surface. The days grew shorter as autumn crept quietly over the coastal town. A crispness settled in the air, threading through the olive trees and stirring the sea into restless waves. Silvia felt the change in her own rhythm, a restlessness she could neither name nor ignore. Milo was patient, as always, but even his calm presence could not hold back the storm brewing inside her. One afternoon, as she worked meticulously on restoring a fresco in the chapel, a letter arrived, its envelope worn and creased, the handwriting unfamiliar. She hesitated before opening it, a slow dread crawling along her spine. Inside was a note from Luca. "Silvia, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said long ago. Please meet me tomorrow at the old pier." Alone. The words blurred before her eyes. The weight of unspoken truths pressed heavily. That evening, Silvia and Milo sat by the fire in his cottage. The soft glow illuminated the lines of his face, casting shadows that danced with the flickering flames. "I got a letter from Luca," she said quietly. Milo's fingers stilled on his cup. "What does he want?" he asked. "I don't know. But I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something, and I'm scared to jump." He reached for her hand, a silent anchor. "You don't have to jump alone." The next day, Silvia stood at the old pier, the wind tugging at her hair, the sea roaring beneath the wooden planks. Luca approached slowly, his eyes searching hers, burdened with something unspoken. "I owe you the truth," he began. She nodded, bracing herself. "I wasn't honest before, not about why I left, and not about what I've been running from." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sick, Silvia. Seriously. I didn't want to drag you into it." The revelation hit her like a cold wave. That night, Silvia returned to Milo's cottage with a heart heavier than before. She shared Luca's secret, the illness, the fear, the vulnerability she hadn't known how to face alone. Milo listened, silent but steady. When she finished, he took her hands in his and said, "We'll face this together." The fragile threads of their lives tangled more tightly, love, loyalty, fear, and hope weaving a complex tapestry. Silvia realized that sometimes, the deepest connections come not from certainty, but from standing side by side in the unknown. Chapter 12, Old Walls, New Cracks. The first frost came quietly. Silvia noticed it as she walked to the chapel early that morning, the thin layer of ice clinging to the stone steps, the way her breath drifted in front of her like a ghost. Everything looked the same, but something in the air had shifted. Just like her. Luca's revelation the day before still echoed in her, not just the illness, but the look in his eyes when he said, "I didn't want you to carry this." But she was carrying it now, along with everything else. And the weight was beginning to show. Inside the chapel, the air was cold and still. The fresco above the altar had begun to come alive beneath her care, colors softening, angels emerging from beneath years of soot and silence. But today, her hands trembled. She dropped the fine brush. It hit the marble floor with a sound far louder than it should have made. Later, she sat at Milo's table, watching the light catch on the rim of his teacup. He sat across from her, silent, listening. Always listening. "You're somewhere else," he said gently. Silvia didn't deny it. "I don't know who I'm trying to save," she whispered. "Luca, or myself." Milo exhaled slowly. "You don't owe anyone your healing." "No," she said. "But I'm not sure I can watch him fade alone." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softly, "Would you leave? For him?" Silvia closed her eyes. The question was too big. Too sharp. And yet, the answer was beginning to form inside her, like something blooming in the dark. That night, she dreamed of Rome. Not the city itself, but the sensation of it, the noise, the stone beneath her shoes, the way the shadows stretched between buildings. She dreamed of hospital rooms she had never seen. Of Luca lying beneath white sheets, reaching for her hand. She woke with tears on her face. In the following days, everything slowed. Milo grew quieter, as though bracing for something she hadn't yet confessed. He still kissed her with the same aching tenderness. Still held her with the same reverence. But she felt the space growing between them. The space created by choices not yet made. She tried to ignore it. She poured herself into her work, into her silence, into the ritual of cleaning what time had tried to erase. But cracks were beginning to show. In the plaster. In her voice. In the way she looked at Milo and saw not just the man she loved, but the one she might be about to leave. One evening, just before the sun slipped into the sea, she found Milo at the edge of the cliffs. He stood tall, still, the wind catching his coat like a sail. She stood beside him without speaking. Finally, he said, "You've already decided." Silvia turned to him, startled. "What do you mean? You're leaving?" Her throat tightened. "I haven't. You don't need to say it. I can hear it in the way you breathe." She looked out over the water. "He's dying, Milo. I know. And I don't know what that makes me if I turn away. It makes you human." He faced her then, his unseeing eyes aimed toward her voice. "But Silvia." His voice cracked. "If you go, don't come back out of pity. Or guilt. Or some imagined sense of debt. Come back because you choose me. All of me. Not just the version of me that makes you feel safe." Silvia felt the words slice through her like a winter wind. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. And in that silence, the one they had built their love upon, everything changed. Chapter 13, The Road That Waited. The ticket to Rome sat on the kitchen table for 3 days before Silvia could bring herself to touch it. It was just paper. Thin, white, printed in sharp black ink. But it might as well have been a map out of her heart. She watched it every morning, as she sipped her coffee. She didn't speak of it. Neither did Milo, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't the sacred stillness they once shared, the kind that hummed like a melody between two hearts. Now, it was hesitation. A space too fragile to lean on. She packed slowly. A sweater. A scarf. Her favorite jeans. She didn't know how long she'd be gone. A week. Maybe more. Maybe forever. Milo helped her fold her coat, his fingers brushing the fabric with care. "Do you want me to take you to the station?" he asked. She paused. "No. I don't think I could say goodbye twice." He nodded, lips pressed into a tight, unreadable line. On the day of her departure, the sky was pale and stretched thin, like parchment. The sea was quiet, unusually so, as if it, too, held its breath. Milo walked her to the garden gate. They stood there in the stillness. She took his hand and placed it gently over her heart. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. He nodded. "It's still yours," she said. "Even if I go." He pulled her into his arms, and for a long moment, neither moved. Then he whispered, "Promise me something. Anything. When you find whatever you're searching for, come back whole. Not for me. But for yourself." Silvia blinked back tears. "I'll try." She boarded the train alone. The rhythm of the tracks beneath her felt like a heartbeat not her own. The further she traveled, the more the town faded, the cliffside paths, the scent of lemon trees, the memory of Milo's fingertips tracing poems across her skin. Rome rose before her like a shadow she once escaped. Luca was waiting at the hospital gate. He looked thinner than she remembered. His skin more fragile. But his eyes still carried the same intensity, the same longing. He smiled when he saw her. Not with triumph, but with something softer. Something grateful. "You came," he whispered. She hugged him, not tightly, not passionately, but as someone clinging to what's left of a shared past. "I had to," she replied. That night, she sat beside his bed, listening to the beeping machines, the slow rhythm of a body fighting against time. And yet, in the quiet, her heart drifted. To another man. Another silence. Another kind of pain. Milo had once told her, some storms don't need thunder to ruin everything. Just the soft sound of a door closing. And now, as she sat miles away from him, Silvia finally understood what that meant. Chapter 14, Ink and Saltwater. The hospital room had become a quiet rhythm. Drip. Tick. Breath. Silvia sat in the visitor's chair by the window, notebook in hand, watching the world pass in pieces, the way light shifted across the sterile walls, how the rain made rivulets on the glass like veins searching for connection. Luca slept most of the time now. Some days he woke clear-headed, telling stories from when they were kids, about the orange bike they used to share, or the ruined fountain where they kissed once, clumsily, beneath fireworks. Other days, he didn't recognize her at all. She stayed anyway. But at night, in her borrowed apartment 3 blocks away, she found herself replaying things she wasn't supposed to. The texture of Milo's voice when he said her name. The sound of his breath when they lay side by side. The way silence could feel safe when it was with him. She had thought distance would make things clearer. Instead, it only sharpened the ache. On the 11th day, she found the letter. It had been slipped under her door, sealed with thick parchment, her name written in Milo's unmistakable, slanted handwriting, the one he had learned after losing his sight, tactile and precise. She sat down before opening it. Her hands trembled. Inside, Silvia, I have never known how to ask someone to stay. Not when I've built a life expecting everyone to leave. You once told me love was listening. So I've listened, to the silence since you've gone, to the way the walls creak when I walk without you beside me, to the music that no longer plays the same. I don't ask you to return. But if you ever find yourself walking toward the sea again, know that you are welcome here. No questions. No timelines. Just the bench, the waves, and a man who never stopped waiting. Silvia read it once. Then again. Then folded it slowly, pressed it to her chest, and wept. That night, Luca's fever spiked. She sat by his side as he muttered nonsense between sleep and delirium. She held his hand through the hours, soothed his sweating brow, whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. But somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. She had come to offer care, but she couldn't offer love. Not anymore. Not like before. The next morning, Luca opened his eyes. I saw you, he whispered. In my dream. But you weren't mine. Silvia held his gaze. No, she said softly. I never really was. And for once, he nodded without trying to fight. The days that followed were slow and kind. They watched sunsets from the window. Talked about forgiveness. Let go of things that didn't need to be carried anymore. Silvia wasn't running this time. She was choosing. And deep in her chest, she knew where she would go when it was time. Chapter 15, The Sound of Returning. The train pulled into the coastal station just after dusk. Silvia stepped off slowly, her suitcase light, far lighter than when she had left. She had packed less this time. Fewer clothes. No plans. No apologies. Only one letter. Folded neatly. Tucked in her coat pocket like a second heartbeat. The town looked the same, as if it had been holding its breath for her return. The salty air greeted her with a chill, brushing her cheeks like the hand of an old friend. She walked through familiar streets, past shuttered cafes and stone gardens half swallowed by vines. Her boots echoed softly against the worn cobblestones. Every step a memory. Every breath a reckoning. When she reached the gate to Milo's cottage, the sky had begun to darken, painted in deep purples and softened golds. She didn't knock. She stood there, uncertain. But before her hand could lift to the door, it opened. And there he was. Milo. Standing in the warm lamplight, wearing the same gray sweater she used to borrow, his eyes blind but somehow still finding her. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Silvia stepped forward. I came back, she whispered. He smiled, slow, soft, and full of something that felt like relief and awe all at once. I know. Inside, everything was as she had left it, the scent of cedar, the stack of unread Braille music, the teacup with a tiny crack still resting on the counter. But now, the space felt different. Not haunted. Not fragile. just waiting. Later, they sat on the bench by the sea. No words. Only the waves. Silvia tucked herself beneath his arm. His fingers traced the edge of her sleeve, learning her again like Braille, tenderly, without urgency. I stayed with Luca until the end, she said, quietly. Milo nodded. I forgave him. Another nod. And myself. Milo turned his face slightly toward her voice. Good. She looked at him, at the man who had once taught her how to hear the world again. I'm not the same. I didn't want you to be. She exhaled. But I still love you. He smiled. Then stay. Not because you're broken. But because you're free. And she did. Not all at once. But day by day. She painted again. Laughed again. Watched the sea from their window and let the sound of it anchor her. Some days were still quiet. Some days, heavy. But in the arms of the man who never stopped waiting, Silvia began to live the kind of life she had only ever restored for others, gently, layer by layer, until even the cracks became something beautiful. Chapter 16, The Quiet After. Autumn lingered like a whisper that refused to leave. The days stretched golden and long. The sea softened into a constant hush that threaded itself through their lives, through the kitchen windows in the morning, through their walks along the stone path in the evening, through their sleep. Silvia and Milo had carved out something small, steady, and warm. It wasn't the kind of love that danced in grand gestures or declarations. It was the kind that folded laundry side by side. The kind that listened without interruption. The kind that touched only when words would fail. And for a time, it was enough. Silvia restored again. A nearby chapel had commissioned her to clean a water-damaged mural above a crypt. Every day, she disappeared for hours into the stone chamber, dusting back centuries with the softest brush. Milo, in turn, began composing again. His fingers danced across the old keyboard in the corner of the cottage, hesitant at first, but bolder each day. He hummed melodies in the kitchen, tapped rhythms into Silvia's wrist while she read on the couch. Their lives had become a quiet symphony. Imperfect, but in tune. One evening, after the rain, they sat outside with a blanket wrapped around their shoulders, listening to the water. Silvia spoke first. There's been an offer, she said, voice low. From Florence. A museum restoration. 6 months. Milo didn't flinch. Will you take it? I don't know. Do you want it? She hesitated. Part of me does. But it would mean leaving. You've done that before. This time would be different. How? She turned to him. Because this time, I'd be leaving a home. Not just a place. That night, she sat at the kitchen table long after he'd gone to bed, staring at the email on her laptop screen. The offer was generous. The work prestigious. A dream she'd had before she ever met Milo. But her dreams had changed. Or maybe she had. She closed the laptop and pressed her forehead to her hands. She didn't know what scared her more, leaving, or staying and letting the world forget who she used to be. The next morning, Milo made tea and handed her a cup without a word. When she took it, their fingers touched, and he held on just a second longer. You're not selfish for wanting more, he said, as though he had read her mind. And you're not lesser if you don't come with me, she replied. He smiled. I'd wait again, you know. Even if it broke me. Silvia looked down at the cup in her hands. She wasn't ready to answer, but the question had been asked. Chapter 17, Florence, Unfolding. The train to Florence cut through the landscape like a thread pulling open a seam. Silvia sat alone, her bag at her feet, Milo's letter tucked in her coat pocket again, the same letter he'd written weeks ago, folded and unfolded so many times it now felt like skin against hers. Familiar. Quiet. Present. He had kissed her softly that morning, no pleading in it, just warmth, a touch that said, go if you must. I will still be here. And she had gone. Florence met her with its usual elegance, domes rising from terracotta rooftops, streets that echoed with footsteps centuries old, an air laced with turpentine, espresso, and something indescribably ancient. But something in Silvia remained still. She moved through the museum like a different woman now, more grounded, quieter inside. She greeted her team, unrolled parchment plans, arranged her brushes in perfect rows. She stepped back into the role she had once chased with such hunger. But it didn't consume her this time. It fit, gently, like a coat she had worn before but now buttoned slowly, carefully, as if aware it no longer needed to keep out the cold. The fresco was a Madonna with downcast eyes and a crack running through her throat. Each day, Silvia peeled away centuries of dust, uncovering color, sorrow, intention. She spent hours beneath scaffolding, humming half-songs Milo had composed, her mind wrapped in silence, her hands steady. And yet, each evening, she found herself reaching for her phone, just to check. No messages. But she didn't mind. She hadn't promised to write. And Milo hadn't asked her to. Still, she missed his stillness beside her. Missed the weight of his hand finding hers without fail. Missed the way his silence made her braver. 2 weeks passed before the email arrived. A curator in Rome had seen her preliminary restoration notes. They were offering her a long-term role. Research. Leadership. Prestige. It was the kind of opportunity she had once measured herself by. And yet, she read it twice, and felt nothing but a slow, hollow ache. Because all she wanted, as she looked out over the city from her small rented flat, was to describe the sunset to someone who couldn't see it. Someone who had taught her how to listen instead. That night, she sat in the garden outside her studio, wrapped in a scarf, pen trembling in hand. She wrote, "Milo. Today I uncovered a section of blue I hadn't expected. It was hidden beneath plaster, delicate and defiant, as if the painter had hoped no one would find it. But I did. I think it was meant to be seen. I used to think love was about choosing someone over everything else. But now I know it's about choosing someone while still being yourself. I want both. I don't know what that means yet. But I think you're the only one I want to find out with. If you're still listening, I'll come back. Not out of fear. Not out of guilt. But because when I close my eyes and imagine a life, you're still in it." Chapter 18, The Shape of Coming Back. Silvia didn't tell him she was returning. She simply packed her bags in Florence, left the letter on her desk, and boarded the early train. This time, her suitcase was even lighter. Her hands, steadier. Her heartbeat, loud, not with fear, but with clarity. She arrived just before evening, when the sea wore its softest blues and the wind combed gently through the tall grass by the cliffs. Everything was as she remembered, and yet, something in the air told her time had passed. She had passed through it. And so had he. Milo wasn't in the house when she arrived. She stood at the open door, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, and waited. The scent of dried lavender still clung to the corners of the kitchen. The piano bench was slightly askew, as if someone had just risen from it. The pot of tea on the stove was still warm. She smiled. He knew. She found him on the cliff's edge, as always, facing the wind. A new walking stick rested by his side. His hair had grown slightly longer, caught by the breeze like threads of smoke. He didn't turn, but his head tilted. "You're here." She stepped beside him. "I told you I would be. I wasn't sure if you meant someday, or now." "Now," she said. And the days after. They stood for a long moment, silence pressing gently between them, not a pause, but a breath being held. Then, Milo reached into his coat pocket and held something out. "A key." "What's this?" she asked. "The studio," he said. "What studio?" "I've been building something. With help." A quiet smile ghosted his lips. "I thought, maybe you'd want to paint more than ruins. Maybe you'd want to create." Silvia took the key slowly. "Create what?" "Anything. A world. A wall. A life." The studio was small, tucked beside the orchard just beyond the garden. Fresh pine beams. large windows facing the sea. A blank canvas already stretched on the far wall, a tray of clean brushes beside it. And near the door, a chair, worn and low, with space beside it for a second. Silvia turned slowly, her hand to her mouth, tears burning hot and quick. "You made this, for me." Milo stepped carefully inside, hands out until they found the edge of the canvas. "For us," he said. She walked to him, touched his face. "You knew I'd come back." "I hoped." That night, they lit candles. She painted the first line across the canvas, a soft streak of blue, like the beginning of sky. He sat beside her and hummed a melody she hadn't heard before. "Is that yours?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's ours." Silvia realized then that coming back hadn't meant surrendering herself to love. It had meant finding a version of it that honored her passion, her past, her pain. A love that didn't ask her to choose between parts of herself, but waited patiently while she gathered them all into one place. Here. Home. Chapter 19, The Letter from the City. Rain tapped softly against the cottage windows. Silvia sat at the edge of the bed, watching droplets chase each other down the glass. The studio had begun to fill with sketches and scattered colors, seatone palettes, unfinished figures, silhouettes that spoke more of emotion than of form. Milo's music had followed suit, his piano playing echoing through the walls each evening in melodies shaped like memory. Their rhythm had returned. But something was shifting again. One morning, a letter arrived, thick paper, sealed in deep blue wax. Milo handed it to her when she returned from a walk, his expression unreadable. "Rome," he said. "That same museum." Silvia held the envelope a moment too long. Inside, an invitation. A personal commission. Not just a restoration, a curation. They wanted her voice. Her vision. And they offered permanence. A title. A team. A future she had once begged the stars for. She didn't show Milo the letter until later that night. They sat in the studio, the scent of oil and paint still warm in the air. He listened as she read each line aloud, slowly, as if every word peeled back a piece of skin she wasn't ready to shed. When she finished, silence fell between them. He didn't say go. He didn't say stay. He only said, "Do you still want that version of your life?" She exhaled. "I don't know. I used to think success was the only thing that would make me feel whole. And now," she looked at the room they'd built, the life they were painting into existence. "Now I wonder if wholeness isn't something I have to chase. Maybe it's something I choose." Still, that night she couldn't sleep. She rose long after midnight, barefoot, and walked through the wet grass to the cliff's edge. The sea was loud with wind and dark with ink. She pressed the letter against her chest. Not out of longing, out of mourning. Because for the first time, she wasn't afraid of turning something down. In the morning, she returned to the studio and picked up her brush. A canvas sat waiting, empty, expectant. She didn't paint a cathedral. Not a museum wall. Not a city. She painted a hand. Reaching. Not clinging. Not begging. Just offering. Milo entered hours later, drawn by the silence. He touched the edges of the canvas, finding the shape of it with the tips of his fingers. "You've decided," he said. Silvia turned to him, paint on her cheek, her hand stained in cobalt. "I already had," she said. "I just didn't know until now." They burned the letter in the fireplace that night. Not out of anger, but as a ritual. A way of saying, "I am allowed to change my mind. I am allowed to grow elsewhere." Together, they watched the paper curl, flame licking the words that once defined her worth. She turned to Milo. "I don't want to be seen by the world." He smiled. "You already are. By me." Chapter 20, The House That Listened. The sky opened for real that morning. Not metaphorically, though it had done that too, but physically, gloriously, clouds parting in long ribbons above the sea, casting golden streaks across the water and letting the light spill over everything like music. It was the first clear day in weeks. And Silvia stood barefoot on the porch, a mug in hand, watching neighbors carry folding chairs and violin cases and canvas-wrapped paintings up the hill toward the orchard. Their house had been still for so long. Today, it would breathe aloud. They had called it an evening of light. Milo's idea, born one night as they sat on the floor, their backs against the studio wall, surrounded by charcoal sketches and half-written sonatas. "Let's open the doors," he'd said. "Let them see what silence gave us." So they did. Artists from the region brought their work, sculptures shaped like wind, watercolors that shimmered like memory. Musicians set up beneath lemon trees. Local children ran between easels and empty wine glasses, laughing in the shade. And at the center of it all, the studio. Their studio. The room that had once been blank now buzzed with quiet awe. Silvia's paintings hung across every wall, not portraits of people, but of moments, a hand reaching out of fog, a shoreline before rain, the exact blue of an eye that cannot see. Milo played just after sunset. Someone helped him to the piano outside beneath the olive branches. Silvia sat nearby, heart pounding, knees folded beneath her in the grass. He didn't introduce the piece. Didn't name it. He just played. And it was as if the wind stopped to listen. There were no words. No lyrics. Just notes, some hesitant, some certain, weaving through the trees, through the sky, through her. It was not a perfect performance. But it was whole. And when he finished, no one clapped right away. They just breathed. And that, somehow, felt truer. Later, Silvia stood by the stone wall with Milo beside her, his hand resting over hers. "Do you hear that?" he asked. She tilted her head. "The ocean." "No," he smiled. "The life." She leaned closer. People talking, laughing, moving gently around one another, not rushing, not proving. Just being. "Yes," she whispered. "I hear it." When the last guest left, they didn't clean. They sat in the doorway, 2 cups of tea gone cold beside them, silence blooming between their shoulders like it always had, not absence, but understanding. Milo turned toward her. "Would you do it again?" "Fall in love?" she teased. "Leave." "Return." "Stay." She looked out over the sea, silver in moonlight. "Yes," she said. "Because every part of it brought me here." And as night deepened, the house stayed awake just a little longer, holding their laughter in its beams, their music in its floorboards, and their promises in the air. Because when the sky finally opened, it had not washed them away. It had washed them home. Epilogue. The years passed quietly, like low tide slipping over smooth stones. Silvia and Milo never chased greatness. They didn't need to. Their greatness came in gentler forms, in the way Milo learned to find her by sound alone, and Silvia learned to stop running from stillness. In the garden that grew without planning. In music that never needed to be performed. In paintings no museum would own, but which still stirred hearts. People came and went. Some stayed for a season, others only for an evening. But everyone left with something, a note, a sketch, a silence that echoed long after. Silvia's hair turned to silver, but her hands remained steady. Milo's hearing grew even more attuned. He said he could hear her thinking. On their last anniversary, she painted a single canvas, the sea in winter, and 2 chairs beside it, one slightly turned toward the other. Milo touched it, smiled, and said, "You captured forever." They didn't need a grand ending. They already had one. Every day that came after was simply another chapter, softer, slower, but still written in light.